D&D dungeons tend to feel very predictable. Players walk in, pick an obvious path, and rush through the rooms hoping they will get XP and gold. I've been DMing for over 20 years and seen this happen over and over again. Dungeons that end up feeling like a routine instead of an adventure the players care about. So in this video, I will show you what's actually inside a great dungeon. And I will give you a repeatable system for designing dungeons that create real choices and real engagement, so you stop dreading prep and your players stop treating them like a checklist. And first, to do this, I would like you to imagine something. Pretend you're at a restaurant. The menu is long, like 47 items long, so you stare at it, maybe panic a little, and then you do what I often do, let's be honest. You order the burger. It's the safe choice, and you got option paralysis. But is it choice or surrender? You might not like it, but most dungeon choices are just like that. Actually, no choices at all. It's one of the most common mistakes I see people make. The dungeon is a succession of doors and tunnels and corridors with no choices involved. So I think this is what we need to fix first, because everything else flows from there. I think there are 3 ways we typically fail at this. The first way is one path is obviously better. Like maybe there's a golden glow somewhere, or helpful NPCs, or just clearly less danger. So yeah, maybe there are 2 paths, but if one is glowing, it's pretty much a good old railroad. Second one is when players have 0 information about either path. There is no single clue, context, or things to reason with. So you're implicitly asking the players to flip a coin, and they're not choosing, but playing the lottery. And the third, sneaky one, the players don't need to sacrifice anything meaningful. I don't mean choosing who dies, but that's when both paths lead pretty much the same outcome, or loot, or story. In my experience, players have this almost spider sense when it comes to this. They know it's coming, and they immediately stop caring about the decision. So to fix these problems, I believe we need to understand that real choice has a structure. You need the opposite of what we just discussed, meaning no dominant option. Neither path can be obviously correct. Enough information for players to reason with. Reason being the key word here. Stop making them guess. A real trade-off, by that I mean choosing one thing equals losing something at the same time, and outcomes that actually reflect the investment. If any one of those is missing, the choice stops existing. Alright, so let's apply this to forks in the road. What does a good dungeon fork actually look like? Well, like this. On the left path, there are bloodstains on the stone. Players can hear nothing but dead silence, and there is cold air bleeding through the doorway. On the right path, there are strange flickering lights, whispers that might be voices or might be wind, and warmth. It's almost too warm. Neither is obviously the right path, because both cost something. One promises danger you can see, with the bloodstains, and the other danger you can't quite identify with the whispers and the warmth. So you're not asking the party to solve a puzzle, but to commit to an interpretation of evidence, which they don't have a lot of, just enough to make it a choice. When they do commit and implicitly say, yes, we chose this, they are pushing down the first domino that will trigger the chain reaction we'll discuss in a minute. Right after, I give you a step-by-step method to help you do this every time. First, test your forks. Use that quick brain of yours to make 20 imaginary groups run through them. If 80% of those would pick the same option, congrats, you've built a false choice and you get to redesign it. Then you give 2 to 3 clues per path. Please don't make it 0, because that's how you ask for random guessing. But not exhaustive either, otherwise you'll accidentally make one answer obvious. For example, 2 doors, 1 wood, 1 iron, ask them to flip a coin. But claw marks, rot smell, growling, dried blood, and your ranger's senses tingling gives away too much. So try to find the balance. Let them theorize without being certain. And finally, make the trade-off explicit. Choosing A should mean losing something real about B. If the left path gets them to the boss before the ritual completes, but the right path is longer and passes through the treasure room, They have to choose between arriving early and unprepared or late but armed. And just like that, you made an actual fork with real information and your players are already invested in this dungeon. But no matter what they choose, your dungeon is still at risk, because now we are running into our next problem. Remember the dominoes? But just before we go on, because you're in a dungeon design video and you probably like loot too, I'd like to make a deal with you. If you like these videos, please do me a favor and subscribe to the channel now. And in exchange, I promise to work obsessively to keep rewarding you with better and better videos. Alright, so back to our dominoes. Let's say your players picked left, because they're into bloodstained silence and cold. You know, why not? So now they're walking down the corridor. The fork is behind them, and I've seen this happen time and time again. Nothing happens. Players are just moving through space with their eyes on the next room. But why does this corridor have to be that space? I mean, you have your player's curiosity, so doing nothing now means you risk losing it. I think you need to use the same mechanism mysteries used to solve this. Mysteries have gaps in them. Good ones rely on you almost knowing something, but not quite. And your brain sees that gap like it's an itch it's dying to scratch. I believe that's the engine your corridors and pretty much all the exploration in your dungeon should be running on. Remember the information sweet spot we talked about just before? Too little info, they're guessing. Too much, they stop theorizing. Well, exploration should take this, but to the next level. And we know how it works for forks in the road, but I think there are two other classic dungeon components we have to apply this way of thinking to. And they work together. First, we have good old traps. Players expect them, but quite often they take the form of a hidden pit trap with no warning. So they're just gotchas. You know, when players fall into one of those, they couldn't have known. So there's no engagement before it triggers. But if you tell your players the dust in the hallway is disturbed in a weird pattern, where one stone is slightly newer than the others, if you add a barely audible clicking sound to that, even if you hide those behind an investigation roll or something, now they can come up with theories. Is it timed? Does the rogue have the right tools to disarm it? If they fail, will it hurt regular bad or bad bad, etc.? The trap becomes a puzzle they can actively solve, and it stops being some kind of random tax on their hit points. And then we have exploration pacing. To achieve good pacing, you should layer your reveals. You give them something for free when they enter the corridor. The obvious stuff, like its shape or the immediate temperature. Then, you reward engagement and player questions by revealing the interesting stuff that requires attention as they progress. Scratches and broken torches, etc. And the things that demand investigation, the loose stones, for example, should cost time and resources. This layered approach will allow you to make exploration feel like earning information instead of just receiving it. So here's what you actually do to make this work. First, ask yourself, what question does this corridor or room put in my players' heads? If you can't name a specific question, like why are these torches dead or why is this floor different, chances are the space you're working on is dead and you need to add something that makes them wonder. And then you keep the internal dialogue going. Can they answer that question immediately? If yes, then you've filled that gap I was telling you about, and I think you should pull back a little. Try to leave some room for theorizing. Corridors, exploration in general, are parts of the dungeon and should not be the boring parts between interesting rooms. They give you the opportunity to build anticipation, which will make those rooms hit that much harder. Tension and release, like in music. Now, once you've done that, your players have traveled down that awesome corridor with their curiosity maxed out. They all have different theories, and that is when we run into our next problem. Because what happens when they enter a room with stuff in it? By the way, if you're thinking, okay, cool, but my players are just so chaotic they will never care about any of this. Well, that's exactly why I created the Plot Engineering Blueprint, which is a free guide to help you guys make sure you are able to prep games that adapt to players' choices. And you can get it by just clicking the link in the description. Alright, so now your players step into the next chamber, and there's a creature there. Let's say it's some kind of guardian. Doesn't really matter what exactly, like put your favorite monster there. What matters is your players are probably going to want to fight it. Because, let's be real, most players don't really wonder about whether they should fight. They see a monster and ask if they should roll initiative quickly. That's just how most tables work. But a lot of them spend a long time worrying about, should I use a level 3 spell slot or try to do this with cantrips? Or should I use this potion now or keep it for when I really need to use it? Etc, etc. Decisions about resources are those the players actually spend time on. And if you want to make your encounters and therefore your dungeons better, I think understanding why can really help. So human brains are weird. Like we're pretty much programmed to feel like losing something hurts about twice as much as gaining the same thing feels good. We're really loss-averse creatures, which explains a lot about typical player behavior, including the stuff that can get annoying if pushed too far. A player hoarding a potion even when their character is gonna have to start rolling death saves soon is not being stupid. Using the potion simply feels wrong. It feels like they're losing something. The brain gives, I no longer have this potion, priority over I'm currently dying. Same for the spellcasters out there trying to save high-level spell slots when they're already 3 encounters deep in that day. It may not be rational, but it's predictable, which is great because it means that you, the DM, can count on it and design for it. So how do you do that? Well, I think encounters end up feeling boring when resources management does not need to enter the conversation, and feeling good when it puts the players in a position where holding back has a visible cost. So in our case, I think the monster or guardian shouldn't be just dangerous. It should be doing something. Like maybe it's dragging a group of prisoner NPCs toward a pit, or performing a ritual that gets worse every turn it completes, for example. You can come up with dozens of variations around these ideas. The point is to try and create situations that start competing with the save my spell slot mentality. If the players don't use their kit strategically, things will get bad. We're creating reasons to spend by using time to our advantage and making it matter. This is also when I invite you to think about retreats. A lot of groups I know and have been a part of don't really retreat. It's either win and loot or TPK. But if you train your players to feel like it's an option by giving them subtle clues to chew on, it changes the whole resource management discussion. You introduce uncertainty, which leads them to, did that DM balance the dungeon with this encounter in mind? Or should we flee? Or did the DM even think we could reach that part of the dungeon so quickly? These types of metagaming questions will happen, so why not leverage them and use them to your advantage? If you design for it, retreat can become a very cool narrative moment because it feels dramatic in itself. Think about, the Moria mines. To make it feel good, I think you should aim for retreat feels possible but costly. Going back to your example, in the Guardian room, there's a clear exit, but using it means the ritual completes and the prisoners die, and the treasure, aka loot room, is gone forever. The design of the encounter should make the players stop thinking about retreat like failure and start considering it as a trade-off. Now, once they've either killed the monster or negotiated their way out, or chosen to flee, comes the short rest question. Is it time to progress? I think that same way of thinking applies here as well. If resting has no real cost, it's not really a decision. They will rest when it makes sense, depending on their classes, current level, magical equipment, etc. And yeah, sure, the 5e rules tell us a short rest is 1 hour long, but is it that costly? Not really, unless the dungeon changes while they rest. Like if the boss moves, or the patrol shifts and the window for something closes. Now we're talking, because the players start making calculations, making resource management feel more meaningful. because the spell slots and potions that were used are now in the balance. So here's how you actually do all this, the practical stuff. When you design an encounter, ask yourself, what happens if they hold back? If the answer is nothing, they just take longer to win, the encounter probably won't force interesting choices. Simple way to solve this? Add a clock with something that gets worse while they play it safe. Then ask, what would retreat cost them? If there's no answer, add one. It shouldn't be you can't retreat, but if you retreat, you will lose X. And after the fight, ask what changes if they take a rest. If the dungeon just waits for them politely, rest stops being part of the story and just becomes a checkbox on their character sheet. So, make that dungeon alive, with things changing or escalating with time. Now, I have 3 remarks regarding what I just said, because I can already read some of the comments. 1. I know some classes have better cantrips than others, so I'm not saying your goal should be to design fights that will compel the warlocks to stop using their minigun thing. It's all about the big picture. Think about the group, not individual characters. 2. If we're talking about 5e, the game is balanced in a way that the characters should be able to go through a few encounters each day. So don't design every single one in a way that will make the players have to spend all their resources to survive a single fight. And 3. D&D and TTRPGs in general are not DM versus players type games. You shouldn't try to win against the players. These elements are there to create more tension and unique situations so everyone has more fun, not to counter the player's toolkit. If you do this correctly, your players will start seeing the game differently, and it will become easier to tie together the mechanical and narrative aspects of the game together. I think a great dungeon shouldn't be just a series of rooms, but a journey through decisions. The players have chosen a specific path of the fork, splitting their intentions. Then they've seen their curiosity rise in the corridor before fighting their way through cool encounters that had them thinking about their strategy and what they were willing to risk. A great dungeon is a condensed way of exploring many of the cool mechanics that make this game so unique. But in the end, I think players should be able to look back at their adventure and forget the stat blocks and loot. And just remember the story that they built together. So now you know how to build cool dungeons. But this game is not all about dungeons. So how do you prepare, the rest of it? The NPCs and inns and social encounters? Well, I think a great way to do it is to learn by studying the best. So click on this video next to find out how Brennan Lee Mulligan solved D&D prep.